I'm Terry Moore with the Unified Path. Today we're going to be joined in conversation with Dr. Greg Goode, who is one of the acknowledged teachers of the direct path and non-dualism. He has a PhD in philosophy and also 5 books in print, and he's also a good friend of mine. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Greg, I am so happy to have you with us again. I know that you are thought of as one of the great teachers of the direct path, yet you've been such a help and proponent of the unified path. I'd like to ask about how your experience has brought you here.
It turns out that if I look at my life, my spiritual life, I had done things throughout my life that end up looking from this vantage point as unification. I had done things with the body, things with the mind, things with the heart, things with the soul, without knowing that there is perhaps a unitive factor to them, but I had just done them, each one sometimes separately, sometimes together. And then when I took Vedanta classes, I took traditional Vedanta classes through the Chinmaya mission for several years. Well, they have a teaching that actually is very similar to this unified path idea, which recommends that one do all the yogas, like in the way they say all means karma yoga, bhakti yoga, jnana, raja yoga, and jnana yoga. And those are all very important to prepare one for what their main soteriological effort is knowledge, self-knowledge. So to make self-knowledge easier, so that one won't be distracted by the other elements demanding attention, one addresses the elements in a nurturing and inclusive way so that they all contribute to one's spirituality. And when I found that, when I heard that teaching, it made great sense. And I found that I had done those things, but never within one tradition, never with perhaps even in a tradition. But when I saw what they were talking about, and I looked at my own history, I saw that all of those things had been done, not for that reason, but that they had been done, and that the person was utilized or was involved in all those different activities. And I could see the spiritual and perhaps psychological benefits of doing those things. So when I see people who are interested in jnana yoga or self-inquiry, something that's very contemplative, I recommend that they also explore those things. If they've done it before, perhaps leverage them, and if they haven't done them before, explore, try, see.
I think that's immensely helpful. I've read biographies of many of the great yogis and have found that in every case, their experience has included the practice of all of the yogas.
Even Sri Atmananda.
Even Sri Atmananda, whose teacher was insistent that he practice bhakti, karma, jnana, and raja yoga. Yet often today, one finds people who think that they do not need a bhaktic element to their practice or a rajic service element to their practice. But in my view, and I think from what you've said, that's a deficit.
I think so too. And I was perhaps lucky enough not to encounter those attitudes that said, you don't need those things. And if I had, by the time I was into looking at the nature of myself, it was already too late because I had had them.
Good for you. Well, that wasn't my experience. I was part of a spiritual group for a long time that thought, we have no need of bhakti. We're about jnana. We're about knowledge, not about worship or devotion or service. But it turns out I have come to believe that all of those elements are critically important to dealing with one's whole self. And if one is on a spiritual path, one wants to bring one's whole self to the path and not leave any parts out, because that will be an impediment to some degree.
Right. And if a person doesn't think that those other elements are important, there is a way to explain the process of self-knowledge which can enlist those elements or can explain their importance.
Yeah.
If you address the body, if you make the body peaceful, it makes your emotional life more peaceful. If your emotional life is more peaceful, your mental clarity and stability is favored at that point, right? It's able to take care of itself at that point. It won't be disturbed by the needs of the emotions, at least during
Yes.
that moment. There will be moments that you can do this by itself. And then once the mind or the intellect is more clear and more stable, you can do your self-inquiry where some of the points are very subtle, very slippery, very evanescent. You can stay on track when you're trying to do this inquiry. All because the parts of the person have been unified.
Yes, and they support and strengthen one another. In many ways, I'm reminded of the phrase that rituals, bodily rituals, open the heart.
Right. Breathing opens the mind.
Indeed.
For example, here's an example. Yesterday I was in the gym, and I was doing my exercises. I was doing some sort of physical therapy exercises for the lower back, but it was a ritualistic thing because I always do them every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I was listening to some music, some nice Brazilian new style bossa nova music. And there were certain songs that I loved so much. Even though I was doing this physical activity, I was lost and I felt such a heart-opening sense of total bliss that I actually had to stop my exercise
Really?
and just be with it until it passed. And then I ended up looking on my phone, oh, who was that artist? Like that. But during that moment, there was a real good example there of how those elements affect each other and work together.
Yes. Now, when I think of the direct path, I think of that applying to what the unified path calls the soul element.
Right.
That element that deals with knowledge of being and interior knowledge. But as focused as one is on that, these other elements continue to be important, yes?
Yes, yes. They're with you until, of course, in the direct path or traditional Advaita-Vedanta, there'll be their end point, the official end point is that there's the end of all duality.
Yes.
Okay. But if we take a step aside from that viewpoint and speak as in a developmental sense or a psychological sense or
Yes.
a personal sense, then those elements have not been left behind. Even though, if you look at it from the inside,
Yes.
it's not like that.
No.
But if you look at it from another perspective, say the perspective of an onlooker, or just another sort of ironic departure from that gestalt, then those elements have not been left aside. They haven't disappeared.
No.
If one, like in this non-duality sense, if anything disappears, it's that everything is realized never to have begun in the first place. But that
Yes.
doesn't give you much to talk about.
No, it doesn't. But in the work of the direct path, these elements are helpful in terms of keeping one centered or situated,
They are.
or making that which one knows conceptually or interiorly, existentially knowledgeable.
Right. And one thing that the direct path is really good at is examining all those elements.
Yes, that's right.
It doesn't leave anything out in its examination.
No, not even itself.
No, that's
right.
last, but
Yes.
but it does talk about the body. It does talk about
That's
the
right.
world. It talks about the mind, the functions of the mind, conceptual objects. If one tends to think that they're not of the mind, well, they get examined as well. And then at the very last, the direct path starts to look at its own tools and structures.
Right.
They come up for examination as well.
Yes, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
This all fits together so beautifully,
Yeah.
and really reaffirms the notion of a unified path that affirms all of these elements: body, mind, heart, and soul.
Now, the direct path, it does all those things, but what it doesn't do, and I think we might have talked about this before, it honors those other activities, but it doesn't actually teach them within its own curriculum, within its own process.
That's right. And as much as one needs to use all of those elements of oneself, one has to look for them where one can find them.
Or one has to learn that they're important, because there's a lot of perhaps direct path literature or non-duality literature that one can read that doesn't mention the importance of those things at all. So, like, if I were to write my direct path book again,
yes,
I would spend quite a bit of time and space on emphasizing the importance of those elements.
Yes.
Because indeed they're in Vedanta too. They're in all the great traditions.
Of course.
Have them.
They're clear.
Even if they don't
conceptualize
it like elements and practices, and they do them. So one is organically led through a holistic process.
That's right. And that's clear, and that's true really across traditions.
Right.
But so often these days one finds people focused on one aspect or one part of the knowledge, even in the direct path, where one's process is inquiry. But that process can actually be supported by the use of the rest of one's being, body, mind, and heart.
That's my experience. Yeah. For example, one of I mentioned Raja Yoga.
Yes.
What is that? That's control of the mind so it can stay on one single pointed object. Sometimes you invoke the body to do that, but it can be done just with the mind. And so I looked around, and my Vedanta teacher was recommending all these yogas, but they weren't teaching them either. So I looked around to see what I could do. And so I landed on Zazen. Zazen has its own way to explain what it does. But I could look at it as a way of following the breath and being silent. And then there's an instruction that if you find yourself either falling asleep or being carried away by thought, you just gently come back to the breath. You count and follow the breath. And that gives you, it's like sharpening a knife. It gives you amazing clarity and ability to stay on point. If you're doing anything, really, no matter what you're doing in life, you're doing it in a more clear and sharp way.
Yes.
And patient too.
Patient.
You become sensitive to smaller distinctions. And so some of this sensitivity comes into play when you're doing deep, subtle self-inquiry.
Yes, indeed. Greg, that's very helpful. And that's perfectly consistent with our emphasis here on the unified path and the use of the whole person in terms of spiritual growth and development.
If I look at the unified path from a perspective somewhat outside it, I can see that it's useful not just if one's goal is self-knowledge. It's compatible with a variety of spiritual goals, no matter what. And it's compatible with anything one wants to do in life, because always one brings one's whole person to it.
Or one should, at least.
Yeah.
Yes, I think regardless of what one does in life, one needs to address it as a whole person. And from our point of view, that's body, mind, heart, and soul. But that's particularly true in terms of one's spiritual life, where one tends to have a more immediate focus on these things, or they tend to be more immediately available.
So I really wish you well with it.
Thank you, Greg. I look forward to more of these conversations. I hope you enjoyed our conversation today with Dr. Greg Goode. I'd be interested in your observations and anything you'd like to add. Please leave those in comments below. Please like and subscribe, and until next time, remember, body, mind, heart, soul, one.